Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. So, I found out yesterday that masks are required in the building where I'm staying. That is to say, they are required in public areas, which for me just means the elevator, the lobby, and the mailroom. So it's not too much of an imposition, except I can feel the mask metaphorically, as it were, tightening around my throat. And it occurred to me there might be another step, another horrifying step, which is that we will be told that we are required to wear masks within our own homes, even if we are alone, even if we live alone, as I do. And what would be the justification for that? I thought, oh, they'll probably come up with something completely crazy, such as masks will help you not infecting yourself with COVID-19. And it's crazy. It's crazy. But then I guess I should stop having these fantasies because I was alerted by Twitter to this amazing headline from the London Telegraph. Face masks could be giving people COVID-19 immunity. Academics, and you always got to trust them, have suggested face masks may be inadvertently giving people COVID-19 immunity and making them get less sick from the virus. And there's a picture, a couple of pictures, or the video here of a generic man and generic woman. I don't want to misgender them. I'm just going to guess that it's almost Funko Pop style, very childish, very irritating. Researchers have suggested that universal mask wearing might be helping to reduce the severity of coronavirus. But how much do you know about face masks and COVID-19 immunity? Test your knowledge with this thread. And then there is a poll. Face masks can give people COVID-19 immunity, and I'm going to vote false. And these are the results. So far, there's 19 hours left with 108,000 votes in. True, 44.5%, false, 55.5%. So there is some sanity left. It's true, the Telegraph screams. Telegraph used to be a very sober newspaper. Indeed, I suppose the Times was the soberest newspaper. But after Conrad Black bought it, it started going down market. And after he sold it, it has gone ferociously down market. Let's see, what else do we have? It comes as increasing evidence that the amount of virus someone is exposed to at the start of the infection, the infectious dose, may determine the severity of their illness. And this is also true. Wearing a mask could reduce the infectious dose that the wearer is exposed to and subsequently the impact of the disease. Yes. And there's a whole story here by Georgina Haynes, which it appears is as old as September the 12th. Why Twitter was alerting me to this only today, I don't know. Let's see. Academics in one of the most respected medical journals in the world, that would be the New England Journal of Medicine, advances the unproven but promising theory. I don't even think this counts as a theory, that universal face mask wearing might be helping to reduce the severity of the virus. If the hypothesis, that's more like it. Theory is not the same as hypothesis. If the hypothesis is borne out, the academics argue, then universal face mask wearing could become a form of variolation, that is inoculation, that would generate immunity and thereby slow the spread of the virus in the United States and elsewhere as the world awaits a vaccine. So, what's next for masks? Are masks going to prevent, heart disease, cancer, diabetes? I mean, it couldn't hurt, right? And thus we roll on to all masks all of the time. That very much seems to be the direction in which we are going. Who must wear masks? This is the rules in England. Everyone. Children under 11 are exempt, as well as those with disabilities, health or mental health conditions, including breathing difficulties and other respiratory conditions, dementia, and autism. I'm going to have to look into this to find out what my excuse for non-compliance might be. Oh, here's some cheery news from Moscow, Idaho. And they don't call it Moscow for nothing. This is from Paula Bolyard at PJ Media. Idaho Christians arrested for singing hymns maskless outside City Hall in country with 0 COVID deaths. Well, don't you think that the fact that this county has 0 COVID deaths makes it even more necessary for everyone to wear masks, even outdoors, perhaps even indoors when they're alone? It seems Moscow, Idaho is going the way of its Soviet namesake, arresting a group of unmasked Christians who had peaceably assembled outside the city hall to sing psalms and protest an extension of the city's masking order. On Wednesday, Moscow's Christ Church, whose pastor is famed Christian theologian Douglas Wilson, announced that a palm sing would be held outside City Hall that afternoon. And I guess this was announced on Facebook, yes. Cross Politics Studios also announced the Palm Sing on their Facebook page. A number of people are gathering at City Hall this afternoon at 4:45 for what we are calling a flash psalm sing. We will sing 3 songs and the doxology and then out. We're asking folks to please not wear a mask. We hope to do the same thing every Wednesday as well. This event was organized by Christ Church, but everyone is welcome. On Tuesday, the City Council extended the mandatory masking order set to expire October 6th until January, despite the fact that there have been no deaths or even hospitalizations due to the COVID-19 virus in Latah County. I don't know whether it's Latah or Latah. Wilson wrote at Blog and Mablog after the event, "This was not an assembly of scofflaws. It really was a peaceful protest, a petition to our city government for a redress of grievances, and a religious assembly all in one. Everything about it was proper. We sang 3 songs and the doxology and then went home." I should point out that Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, John Roberts, who we are assured is a devout Catholic, ruled that First Amendment, doesn't apply. Gavin Newsom gets to decide who gets to go to church or has religious assemblies of any kind and what they might do at these religious assemblies. So much for your constitutional protections. Wilson pointed out that on the day the city council voted to extend the mask order, the mayor of Moscow presided over an outdoor wedding where he did not wear a mask, nor did a city council member who was allegedly in attendance. This is from Moscow Report. Moscow resident Jeremiah Merkel was stopped by MPD after exiting a private building while walking within 6 feet of her cousin without a mask on Main Street and threatened with a misdemeanor and jail time. According to local reports, more than 150 people were in attendance at the gathering to sing psalms and hymns in beautiful 4-part harmony, I might add, although Wilson believes the number was closer to 300. 15 minutes into the gathering, during the very first song, police began to arrest the peaceful psalm singers for failing to wear masks as mandated by Moscow City Council. Latah County Commission candidate and host of the Cross Politics show, Gabriel Wrench, was led away in handcuffs as the group sang, "Some always trust in chariots, others trust in horses, but we recall our Lord and God," lifting their voices to proclaim Psalm 20. The Moscow Pullman Daily News reported that in addition to Wrench, 4 others were cited for being in violation of the masking social distancing order. 2 were arrested and charged with resisting or obstructing an officer. I didn't see any obstruction on the video. So our church Today went to City Hall. I wouldn't say just our church. A bunch of people in our community went to City Hall and went to sing psalms in the parking lot at City Hall. Wrench said, so we're singing psalms. We just kicked off the first, and I'm standing there with my mom right next to me, and we're kind of closest to the police. And Pastor Wilson warned us, if you guys don't social distance, you're probably going to get a ticket. And so everyone kind of got a little closer. The crowd kind of scooted together, closer to one another. And so we started singing psalms, and the cops just walked up to me and my mom first because we're kind of closest to them. They weren't singling anybody out, and they asked if we were together, and my mom grabbed my arm and said, we're family. And then I grabbed my buddy Tyler and said to the cops, we're not. After that, the cop came to talk to me and said, give me your license. I'm probably going to write you a ticket. Wrench told the officer that he didn't need to do this, and the two went back and forth for several minutes, which led to his eventual arrest. He was booked and held for 2 hours at the jail, where he noted 2 deputies were not wearing masks. Wilson wrote on his blog, we have every right to protest the high hypocrisy involved in all of this. Not only so, but I believe we have a responsibility to do so. He quipped that the protest was not conducted Portland style. The federal building is just a block away from City Hall, and I can say that I was very proud of our people. Not one of them tried to burn it down. Rather, we addressed this hypocritical and nonsensical law in a peaceful, orderly, law-abiding, and responsible way. David Shannon, a.k.a. Chocolate Knox, said on the Cross Politics show that Moscow police stood by and did nothing when Black Lives Matter held a defund the police rally in July in front of the police station, violating both masking and social distancing orders. No one was arrested. He said no one, 0 people. Shannon, who is Black, I guess I kind of guessed that from the moniker Chocolate Knox, said he and his wife are strong supporters of the police and that the police chief had even stopped by their house to thank them for their support. Okay. Yes, and there's another story about candidate Gabe Wrench being arrested. This is from local news in Idaho. Isn't Idaho one of those places where people from all over the United States went to flee the increasing tyranny of the other 49? Although, as we have learned, there's no escape. There's absolutely no escape. In Lockdown Skeptics, Will Jones writes today, did AIDS hysteria prefigure COVID hysteria? And if you have been listening to this live stream, I have been saying just that for at least as long as since March and maybe even in February. The parallels are quite profound. Today, we're publishing an original contribution to one of the most interesting sections of Lockdown Skeptics, How Have We Responded to Previous Pandemics? This one is by veteran science and medical correspondent Neville Hodgkinson, who covered the AIDS pandemic for the Sunday Times. He sees depressing parallels between the hysterical overreaction to that pandemic and the overreaction to this one, with the same misallocation of resources. Here's an extract. One of the consequences as now was a huge misallocation of money to the detriment of genuine medical need. A 1993 report from the University of Northumbria Business School, to which Stewart contributed, found that for each AIDS death, health authorities were spending an average of £290,000 on £290,000 on HIV prevention and research, compared with £50 for each death from heart disease. Many UK health regions had considerably more AIDS workers than patients. Whereas in 1985, a Royal College of Nursing report predicted that 1 million people in Britain would have AIDS in 6 years unless the killer disease is checked, the actual cumulative year-on-year total of AIDS cases by 1990 was still below 5,000. Today, AIDS kills fewer Britons than die from falling down stairs, even though deaths might have been avoided if the true nature of the condition had been recognized. In fact, Africa, Stewart's findings and recommendations also remained unpublished by the World Health Organization. It was not until June 2008, 25 years after the panic over AIDS began, that the organization finally admitted the threat of a world pandemic among heterosexuals was over. though it continued to maintain that sub-Saharan Africa was being devastated by the disease. In fact, Africa was and is one of the biggest victims of the illusions around AIDS, as I found when Andrew Neil, then editor of the Sunday Times, sent me there in 1993 to find out what was happening. My reports showing that scarce resources were being misdirected to an imaginary epidemic created by an unvalidated HIV test got the scientific and medical establishment in the UK into a frenzy, but were never refuted. How can scientists, who we look to with so much respect, get things so wrong? The answer is that they are human beings just like the rest of us. Yeah, I'll have more to say on that in just a minute. One of the key lessons that could have been drawn from the AIDS debacle is that there is no such holy grail as the data or the science demanding a particular course of action, contrary to the repeated claims by the Prime Minister and his health secretary. It's how the data are interpreted that is important, and in this regard, the government is receiving a very one-sided and out-of-date perspective. Now, oh yes, one of the most startling points Hodgkinson made is many of the protagonists in the British and American government's response to the COVID crisis are the same people or linked to the same organizations that led the worldwide fight against AIDS. These include Anthony Fauci, the AIDS czar, who as head of the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases has presided over an era in which several $100 billion have been spent on AIDS research and treatment, including a completely futile but continuing search for a vaccine. Well, the errors, he said, came about because the statistical model used rested on two false assumptions. The first of these was that the essential cause of AIDS was HIV. The second was that the virus was already spreading heterosexually beyond the original susceptible groups of homosexual men with multiple sexual partners and drug addicts, and would cause a global pandemic. Tom Bethel covered AIDS extensively for the American Spectator. I believe you can still get his articles. They're still worthwhile reading. He pointed out that AIDS is less of a disease and more of a political program. Now, why would the British government or the NHS be spending an average of £290,000 on HIV prevention and research compared with 50 for each death from heart disease? The reason for that is that despite the denials, AIDS was a disease that overwhelmingly affected homosexuals, and this was an example of homosexuals flexing their political power. Indeed, no one knew that homosexuals had political power, certainly not that much political power, until the AIDS epidemic came along. As noted previously, it was my belief that AIDS was not going to turn out well for homosexuals. I didn't mean just in a medical sense, but in a political or sociocultural sense. This was a disease that supposedly everyone was vulnerable to, and that's what we heard from Fauci and all of the so-called experts, that AIDS was everyone's disease. Then homosexuals were likely to be blamed for this, and they would get it in the neck. Instead, the exact opposite happened. AIDS patients were saints living among us. And so we must give the homosexuals whatever they desire in terms of changes to the law and changes to the culture. And that is precisely what has happened. Michael Fumento, who I've interviewed several times, wrote a best-selling book called The Myth of Heterosexual AIDS, which was roundly ignored when it was not denounced by the establishment, pointing out that AIDS is not a heterosexual disease. Wasn't then, isn't now. In fact, Celia Farber, who also wrote many valuable pieces on AIDS, and a very long one in the last issue of Harper's that Lewis Lapham edited, which was kind of Lapham cocking a snook at all the experts, pointed out that there is not a single confirmed case in New York City of AIDS being spread through heterosexual intercourse. Not one. But we were all scared to death. People would find some sort of discoloration on their body. Oh my God, I've got it. I'm going to die. And I suppose that AIDS also was rather instrumental in the normalization of being a junkie and such like, because it's all about harm reduction and has been for years. How can we be nice to the junkies? How can we be nicer to the junkies? What do the junkies need? Do they need clean needles and orange juice and a cookie and a nice place to shoot up? Or, as we've seen in San Francisco now, do they need, free apartments and free heroin? That's what the Canadian government is doing. It is giving them top quality heroin for free, even while insisting that it is not decriminalizing hard drugs such as heroin, even while insisting that. So what are the early results on harm reduction? Well, it's been a disaster, as we have seen with the explosion of overdoses, fatal overdoses in Vancouver and many other places in North America. Do you think that the experts are going to climb back from their position on harm reduction? No. When do the experts ever climb back on their disastrous predictions? Neil Ferguson's still in business, incredibly, at Imperial College London. Tom Bethel pointed out that the so-called AIDS epidemic in sub-Saharan Africa, which was going to wipe out whole countries, that's pretty much what we were told, was entirely phony, and that AIDS cases were manufactured because there was aid money to be had. And we've rather seen the same thing with COVID-19, haven't we? Because hospitals get much, much, much more money for COVID diagnoses than they do for, things like pneumonia. And similarly with AIDS, it was demonstrated that people who had died of such things as car crashes were put down as AIDS deaths. And we have seen similar things, car crashes, people being shot, being put down as COVID-19 deaths. Here's another thing from Lockdown Skeptics. When will the government treat us like grown-ups? If recent evidence is any look into the future, the answer is no. No time. Never. The BBC continues its infantile campaign against the concept of herd immunity, failing to explain, as Professor Sunitra Gupta does here, that it is a perfectly ordinary scientific term, if clumsy from a PR perspective, the basis of how vaccines protect a population, and the only realistic endpoint of an epidemic where, as in this case, elimination is unrealistic and unjustifiably costly. BBC News reports that it is obtained via a Freedom of Information request every email sent by Sir Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty from the start of February to the start of June, containing the words herd immunity. They appear to be trying to get the pair in trouble for ever having thought, back when they still spoke some sense, that herd immunity was worth talking about. Add a sprinkle of Neil Ferguson alarmist modeling on March 16th, and that's how we got into this mess, as government ministers and their scientific advisors caved to the mob over the following fortnight. The same stunt was pulled on Anders Tegnell in Sweden, who also had to deny that herd immunity was ever an aim, despite emails surfacing that suggest otherwise. But of course, epidemiologists were discussing herd immunity in March. They would have been professionally negligent not to have been. It's a fundamental concept in the science. What this shows is a chronic failure of leadership from our politicians who, rather than explain to the population what herd immunity really means and why building it up is the only viable way to protect the vulnerable and return to normal, crumbled at the first sign of discomfort with the idea and switched to a suicidal suppression strategy while waiting for a Godot. No, actually a vaccine. This treats the public like children who can't cope with grown-up ideas and hard choices. Well, it's nice, really, that Will Young still clings to the belief that the majority of people want to be treated as an adult. I mean, one sees a similar thing with people being paid not to work in my own country of Canada, even people who were not working at the time. And apparently this is going to be extended And I guess when it comes to near to the end, it'll be extended again because we don't need tax revenues in order to fund expenditures. That would be preposterous. Where did people get that idea? We can just print the money, money printer go, brrr. Of course, the United States has a money printer and Canada does not, but that does not seem to be affecting the judgments of our liberal government or the judgments of our servile media. Pollster Ipsos Mori finds support for the government, says the UK government's handling of the crisis at its lowest levels yet. And apparently, public believes that the lockdowns have not been severe enough. Another item, today Lockdown Skeptics is publishing a new paper by consultant pathologist Dr. Claire Craig, looking at how to tell the difference between a real COVID outbreak and one resulting from another seasonal respiratory virus and false positives. Why are we seeing alleged excess COVID-like cases in people in their 20s? The narrative is the same across Europe. That a new surge in COVID cases being driven by young adults. This is despite the fact that during the spring epidemic, symptomatic outbreaks were focused on nursing homes and hospitals. Large numbers of symptomatic young people were not observed in the spring. Why are they being seen now? Why would the impact of the virus at a population level be so different now to what it was in the spring? Real COVID cases lead after a time to rising antibody levels. The percentage of 20 to 29-year-olds with antibodies to COVID has not risen between June and 6th of September. It has actually fallen as it has for the rest of the population. This is a serious inconsistency with the widely accepted hypothesis that the recent surge of flu-like illness must be COVID and the steady continued drop in COVID antibody levels throughout the population. The latter is scientifically provable. The former remains only a hypothesis. Since influenza is a respiratory disease like COVID-19, it is also a disease that disproportionately kills old people. One can see the reason for the confusion. Of course, the confusion is very, very convenient. Barrister and Lockdown Skeptics reader Sarah Ewart got in touch to tell us what happened when she shared on Facebook the letter from the Belgian doctors questioning the wisdom of lockdowns. Yes, it was flagged as false information, confirmed by independent fact checkers. Sarah says, "This has really disturbed me. Assuming the letter is what it purports to be, it represents the view of hundreds of Belgian professionals. I had not realized that free speech and debate was being censored to this degree. I'm in genuine despair over what is happening and desperate to do what I can to restore our country to one of freedom, democracy, and open debate." Well, I don't know. The government says this is that. And the media says, listen to the government. Because if you don't listen to the government, if you don't obey the government in every particular, well, you're a traitor. Aren't you also a murderer? So that explains a lot of the servility demonstrated by the people of various Western countries. But such is the nature of democracy. Isn't the idea of democracy based on the idea of an informed citizenry? But no, we don't need that anymore. In fact, an informed citizenry is dangerous because an informed citizenry might take issue with governments seeking to regulate every single aspect of our lives. Alex Berenson writes, 1/3 of COVID deaths would have occurred this year anyway, most of the rest by the end of 2021. If you can't trust the world's largest for-profit funeral company, who can you trust? They're legally obligated to tell the truth, at least to their investors. Oh, here's another case from Ohio. This is extremely hard to watch. And women arrested for not wearing a mask. This is watching a football scrimmage in Logan, Ohio. She gets tased and then arrested Berenson says, this is the United States, September 2020, and why didn't anyone stand up for her? I guess they don't want to be called a murderer or against science. Oh, Bloomberg opinion, why New York's in a depression and Texas isn't. Berenson comments, ooh, pick me, Teach, pick me. I got this one. Yeah. And this is how governors of free states stand up to MSNBC panic porn. True story, with no lockdown. South Dakota has approximately 1/7 as many deaths per capita as New York State. Fewer than Switzerland, Canada, or France. How about them meatballs? Governor Noem of South Dakota had tweeted, stop spreading fear. Only 8% of South Dakota's hospital beds are occupied by COVID patients. We have and will continue to manage our resources to care for the people who need help. The people of South Dakota have accomplished this without draconian lockdowns. Facts, not fear. Let's have a look at the chat. Hello, William Hicks. Hello, Professor Paul. David Wright says, I only trust my snake oil regimen. Very encouraging signs about the use of vitamin D to prevent people from getting sick or dying from COVID-19. Of course, vitamin D is quite inexpensive. You can buy a bottle of, 100 pills of 50 mg for, depending on where you shop, anywhere from $4 to $10. So there's no money to be made there by big pharma. William Hicks says, saw a post by a friend, a picture of Biden flashing the OK sign, which he reminded everyone had been designated by the media as the universal signal for white power. Not anymore. Well, with Joe Biden, he may think that the OK sign is actually the universal symbol of black power or Black Lives Matter. Halper says, masks will materialize unicorns. Metatron says, every autist I meet loves their mask. David Wright says, I would rather live in Moscow, Russia. PK Teller, did they have a permit to sing hymns? I don't know. One needs a permit, in front of the plaza in front of City Hall. I could be mistaken. These days, one almost needs a permit to leave one's house. David Wright says the police aren't winning any friends from our side either. Good evening to you, buddy. Now we wear the prophylactic on our face. Chogokin666 says, I loved Lewis Lapham's essays. I like some of them, not others. There was a lot of the sort of deliberate contrarian in him, but of course Harper's was a much better magazine once he was editing it than it has since become. Does anyone talk about Harper's at all? Chogokin666, sir, may I please have some free heroin or more free heroin? Halper, there was an 80s college radio hit called Cheap Heroin by the Easter Monkeys. That is not a band that I'd heard of. I've heard of the Happy Mondays, and they were very big on drugs, using them to the extent that they spent a fortune on a Caribbean island, supposedly recording an album for Factory Records, and they sold all the equipment to, guess what? Buy drugs. Okay, let's talk about Breonna Taylor. And I had read a lot about this late woman, and it turns out almost everything that I read about her was false. So, okay, this is it. This is it. I am now going to take a reflexive position that everything, every single last thing, including, temperature reports or the day of the month published by the mainstream media is wrong, and also deliberately wrong. This is from the conservative Treehouse. Everything the media claimed about Breonna Taylor's death was a lie. Truth surfaces, no police charged in her death. The media claimed Breonna Taylor was shot during a no-knock warrant. False. The media claimed Breonna Taylor was shot in her bed. False. The media claimed Breonna Taylor was murdered. False. Everything the media and lawyer Ben Crump claimed about the death of Breonna Taylor and the circumstances around her death was based on lies. The officials in Kentucky allowed a mountain of lies to grow until the evidence was finally presented to a grand jury, and the Kentucky Attorney General was forced to admit the truth. According to evidence revealed at a press conference by Attorney General Daniel Cameron, the police executed a search warrant by knocking on the door. Breonna Taylor and her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, refused to answer the door after the police identified themselves. The police broke down the door. Kenneth Walker was armed and shot first at police. The police returned fire, and that's how Breonna Taylor was shot and killed. No police officers were charged with the death of Breonna Taylor because they were responding to being fired upon. It appears Walker used his girlfriend as a shield. One officer, Brett Hankinson, who did not shoot any person, was charged with wanton endangerment for haphazardly firing 10 shots that entered the adjacent apartment unit. Breonna Taylor's killing set off months of protests in Louisville and other cities and drew national attention. Celebrities and civil rights activists demanding justice and urged the Attorney General to bring charges against the officers involved. Well, they did more than urge, they demanded. Last week, the city of Louisville said it would pay $12 million to Ms. Taylor's estate as part of a legal settlement with her family. This is sickening because on the one hand, I'm certain that Breonna Taylor's family is sad that she's dead. On the other, 12 million smackers, that's going to make a lot of difference in their lives, no question about it. And we had the similar payout in the Trayvon Martin case. There's always a payout. And sort of a bizarre incentive for people to get themselves killed doing something criminal so as to benefit their families. As with the Trayvon Martin case, as with the Michael Brown case, remember him, the gentle giant, as with the Freddie Gray case, everything pushed by the media about the Breonna Taylor case was based on lies. The media will now refuse to admit the truth and will now spin the narrative to claim they never reported incorrectly. Absolutely ridiculous. Let's see, who didn't climb down? Joe Biden didn't climb down. Kamala Harris didn't climb down. Nancy Pelosi didn't climb down. Murder, 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 they said, and there was no murder. I don't know, maybe you want to wait for the facts to come in before indulging in behavior which stokes rioting, which stokes destruction and death, and shooting at cops. Now, let's see. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were briefly pushing the law and order routine. That's difficult. It's difficult to keep up when you're lionizing Breonna Taylor, when you're lionizing all of these people. You know, reading about Breonna Taylor's life, there's a sort of pathetic samelessness to all of these stories. Here's one from August the 30th from the New York Times by Rukmini Calamachi. Breonna Taylor's life was changing. Then Kentucky police came to her door. Yep, she didn't do nothing. She was turning her life around. All we need to know now is that she had or was about to release a mixtape. Breonna Taylor had just done 4 overnight shifts at the hospital where she worked as an emergency room technician to let off some steam. She and her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, planned a date night, dinner at a steakhouse, followed by a movie in bed. Usually they headed to his apartment where he lived alone, and she had left a toothbrush and a flat iron. But that night they went to the small unit she shared with her younger sister who was away on a trip. It was dark when the couple pulled into the parking lot, then closed the door to apartment 4 behind them. This was the year of big plans for the 26-year-old. Her home was brimming with the Post-it notes and envelopes on which she wrote her goals. She had just bought a new car, next on the list buying her own home, and trying to have a baby with Walker. They had already chosen a name. She fell asleep next to him just after midnight on March 13th. The movie still playing. The last thing she said was, "Turn off the TV," he said in an interview. From the parking lot, undercover officers surveilling Taylor's apartment for a drug raid saw only the blue glow of the television. And then it describes the circumstances of her death. Taylor has since become an icon, her silhouette, a symbol of police violence and racial injustice. Michelle Obama and Kamala Harris spoke her name during their speeches at the Democratic Convention. Oprah Winfrey seated the cover of her magazine for the first time to feature the young black woman and paid for billboards with her image across Louisville. Beyonce demanded of the 3 white officers who opened fire to be criminally charged. NBA stars, including LeBron James, devoted post-game interviews to keeping her name in the news. LeBron James went farther than that, claiming that every single time a black person leaves home in the United States, they are hunted down. So, yes, Brianna was the daughter of a teenage mother and a man who has been incarcerated since she was a child. She attended college, trained as an EMT, and hoped to become a nurse. But along the way, she developed a years-long relationship with a twice-convicted drug dealer whose trail led police to her door that fateful night. Yes. Taylor had been focused on her future with Walker, but her history with 30-year-old Jamarcus Glover, an on-again, off-again boyfriend who had spent years in prison, was hard to escape, even after she cut ties with him a month before the raid. When officers rammed the door of her apartment, Walker later explained he fired his gun because he feared it was her ex-boyfriend forcing his way in. Although Taylor had no criminal record and was never the target of an inquiry, Glover's frequent run-ins with police entangled her. She had been interviewed in a murder inquiry and paid or arranged bail for him and his associates. That's the sort of behavior that would lead police, wouldn't you say, to think she was involved in criminal enterprises herself? When Glover called from jail after an earlier arrest in January, she told him that his brushes with the law worried her, according to a recording. Each said, "I love you," before hanging up. A GPS tracker placed on his car later showed him making regular trips to her apartment complex, and surveillance photos showed her outside a drug house. In a series of calls after her death, as Glover tried to make bail, he told another woman that he had left about $14,000 with Taylor. "Bree been having all my money," he claimed. The same afternoon, he also told an associate he had left money at Taylor's home. Aguiar, the lawyer for her family, said that no drugs or cash were found at her apartment after the raid. Thomas Wine, the Jefferson County prosecutor, countered that the search was called off once the shooting occurred. So there is our latest heroine, America's heroine. Rest in power, Breonna Taylor. Now, there seems to be still a great deal of ambiguity about this story. For instance, I was reading a story in the New York Times, and was she still working as an EMT at the time of her death? Because there have been repeated claims that she had been fired. And the New York Times story is rather ambiguous on the matter. No question about it. Okay, let's return now to Louisville. Just a second here. Yeah. Let's return to Louisville. And there's been an arrest in the shooting of 2 police officers in mostly peaceful protests last night. This is from Breitbart. Christina Wong Louisville Metro Police Department has arrested and charged Lorenzo Johnson in the shooting of 2 police officers on Wednesday after the grand jury decision on Breonna Taylor's case was announced. Johnson, 26, was arrested and will face multiple charges of first-degree assault of a police officer and first-degree wanton endangerment. He's accused of shooting the 2 officers around 8:30 p.m. His arrest citation outlines his actions allegedly showed an extreme indifference to the value of human life and put officers at the scene in danger of death or serious injury, according to the paper. Johnson is alleged to have fired a handgun multiple times at LMPD officers responding to a crowd in downtown Louisville that had set fires and refused to disperse. The officers were seriously injured. One was hit in the thigh and another was hit in the abdomen. They were both in stable condition and expected to survive. I don't see an attempted murder rap there. Perhaps there were social circumstances involved. But so much ambiguity. The only thing we know for certain, of course, is that Black Lives Matter and that all whites are racist. A very amusing piece, again from the New York Times, from Nellie Bowles, September 21st. Some protests against police brutality take a more confrontational approach. You think so? The protests are moving into white residential neighborhoods where activists demand that people choose a side. From the very beginning, with George Floyd, we have seen burning and looting, looting and burning, attacks on police officers, and more looting and more burning, and just sort of mindless destruction. Terrence Moses was watching protesters against police brutality march down his quiet residential street one recent evening. This is outside Portland, when some of the group of a few hundred suddenly stopped and started yelling. Moses was initially not sure what the protesters were upset about, but as he got closer, he saw it. His neighbors had an American flag on display. It went from a peaceful march calling out the names to all of a sudden, bang, how dare you fly the American flag, said Moses, who is Black and runs a nonprofit group in the Portland area. They said, take it down. They wouldn't leave. They said they're going to come back and burn the house down. Moses and others blocked the demonstrators and told them to leave. We don't go around terrorizing folks to try and force them to do something they don't want to do, said Moses. I'm a veteran. I'm for these liberties. Nearly 4 months after the killing of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police, some protesters against police brutality are taking a more confrontational and personal approach. The marches in Portland are increasingly moving to residential and largely white neighborhoods, where demonstrators with bullhorns shout for people to come out of your house and into the street and demonstrate their support. These more aggressive protests target ordinary people going about their lives, especially those who decline to demonstrate allegiance to the cause. This is just an outright lie. As I just said, ever since this started in Minneapolis, it's been looting, burning, destruction. Oh, it's just 4 months after this is becoming more confrontational. How long has this nonsense in Portland been going on for? What, over 100 days? But no, you see, the tactics are dividing supporters of Black Lives Matter, with some worried that the confrontational approach will antagonize people who would otherwise be receptive to the message or play into conservatives' critique of the protests, which have been largely nonviolent nationally. Yeah, okay. I may have used this metaphor before, but I'll use it again. Let's say I meet a friend and we sit in a room and we talk for about an hour. And then at the end of the hour, I pull out a gun and I shoot him dead. Would the media then describe this as a mostly peaceful meeting between two people? Because that's what they're doing here. That's what they're doing here. And the word seems to have gone out on the tom-toms that cut this shit out. This is not helping Joe and Kamala. Okay? So could you, just like stop We were all for you, but now it just seems people are getting kind of sick of this. So, just call it off. Okay, we've got the message. You let people burn, loot, destroy, attack with impunity for months, and now you're telling them stop. Well, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Well, there's a piece here on Revolver, which is called, "In the Wake of the Louisville Riots, it's time for the authorities to consider the unthinkable deadly force." Kentucky authorities deserve to be praised. While under relentless pressure from the totalitarian left to sacrifice innocent men to the mob and press murder charges against the police who shot and killed Breonna Taylor, they resisted. Now, as storm clouds of yet another violent Antifa riot gather over the tense Louisville sky, it's their job and the job of the federal government to protect the innocent citizens of Kentucky from the destructive and potentially deadly force of the violent rioters. The DOJ and local police forces could take some inspiration from the words of President Trump. Quote, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts," unquote. If violent riots break out in Louisville in the days to come, authorities have a moral duty to stop those riots with force, including deadly force, if necessary. To understand the full context of the emerging riots, we return to their pretext: the refusal of the state to abuse its power and falsely charge Louisville police officers with the murder of Breonna Taylor. To the left-wing mobs, it didn't matter that the police were executing a completely legal search warrant. It didn't matter that Taylor's boyfriend shot at police before the police fired a single shot. The facts of the shooting were irrelevant, just like they were irrelevant for Kyle Rittenhouse, Garrett Rolfe, and Jake Gardner. The mob wasn't demanding justice, it was demanding retaliation. Or a reckoning. We're not hearing that word reckoning anymore. We heard it dozens of times every day. They don't like that word reckoning anymore. Even professional baseball teams were enlisted into this demented effort. A tweet from the Tampa Bay Rays baseball team on July 24th. "Today is opening day, which means it's a great day to arrest the killers of Breonna Taylor." Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't think that we're going to see this deadly response until Trump's reelection. Elizabeth Warren tweeted, "Two of the three officers who ended Breonna Taylor's life will face no charges. One might get a slap on the wrist. The justice system is beyond broken for Black people. It never worked in the first place. It's time to vote for transformative change. Hashtag say her name." So I see that Elizabeth Warren and Scott Dworkin of the numerous Dworkin clan, they are not stepping down. The ACLU tweeted yesterday with a picture of a man in a mask and wearing a helmet and people about to commit mayhem to everyone taking to the streets tonight to protest against police violence and racial injustice. We're with you. Know your rights. And there's someone called Holly Zoller, who is a large woman, either wearing shorts or a very short dress in one of these U-Hauls, and producing shields for these spontaneous protests. I saw an incredible video today on YouTube. I don't know how long it's going to stay up in YouTube because YouTube does not like such videos, but it took place in Hartford, Connecticut. And it's entitled "Traffic Stop in Hartford, September 21st, 2020. It only has 9,057 views. I can't imagine why not. It lasts for 18 minutes and 39 seconds, and it shows a Black woman, and she's outside of her late model car, and she is screaming obscenities at police. A lot of obscenities, the very worst obscenities, the kind of obscenities that if a, let's say, a white woman or a white man got into a policeman's grill, as the kids like to say, and shouted these obscenities, that person would likely lose a few teeth. But since this is riot season, this just goes on forever. Here's what happened. We have a traffic stop. And so The woman's license is sent to the computer, and it indicates that it's a stolen car. So she is screaming that it is not a stolen car, and she holds up her driver's license as if that would be any proof that her car isn't stolen. And a crowd, this is obviously in a black neighborhood of the city, a crowd assembles supporting her, and they keep shouting, "What's your badge number? Why aren't there any female police here?" The woman, I got the impression that she's worked for government at some time, because she said, "You're done, you're finished, you're going to be on administrative leave immediately." And she just won't, and they keep telling her to calm down, and they keep telling the mob assembling to, just stay back, just stay back. And as I say, this goes on and on and on, and she starts screaming that she's got a baby in the car. Well, maybe she shouldn't have got into this confrontation with the police. And she will not cooperate with this. So, and she starts, acting out. And so she gets taken to the ground. And she starts screaming, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe." She screams this out like about 100 times, and she can clearly breathe. The gallons of oxygen which she'd taken into her lungs. So you can see her. And, her mouth is not obstructed at any time. And she keeps screaming, "I can't breathe." And this is now code. It's code for, you can't arrest me because I haven't given you permission. And look, what it appears to me, what's happening now, because this is a failed audition to be the next George Floyd. This kind of death wish here. I mean, becoming a star, and maybe you could have, Hartford, Connecticut burned down because of you. On the other hand, you might end up crippled or dead. Oh, but then I guess your family would get a huge payout. This is from a YouTube channel called Police Compilation. A traffic stop in Hartford, Connecticut, September 21st. Hartford police have released the body camera footage of a traffic stop early Monday after videos of the incident began circling on social media. The department said it wanted to release the footage quickly to keep the situation as transparent as possible. Police said the incident began when they spotted the vehicle in question on Blue Hills Avenue, which was reported stolen and wanted for its involvement in a shooting incident in a nearby community. Officers pulled the car over and approached the driver, who said she was the owner of the car. After informing her of the situation, the video showed her enraged, telling officers the vehicle was hers. It starts with her saying to an officer, "You lying expletive, because I've never been to no New Britain. I want your badge number. You're going down." She continued to yell at the officer, saying, "Everything I do is legit." And she threw some type of card from her purse at the windshield of the patrol car. An officer approached her and said, "Ma'am, you need to relax." An officer then tried to show her that the vehicle was on the list, and she accused the officers of just adding it. "There's no possible way," she said. "You just did that in the system. There's no expletive possible way my car has ever been reported stolen, ever." She continues to scream "ever" as an officer behind her called out, "Yes, it has." And this goes back and forth. As she continued to be upset with the officers, they told her that they are checking her information against the DMV to verify that she owns the car so they can remove it from the list. The situation quickly escalated, and the woman jumped inside of the car and refused to get out. Officers sternly told the woman to get out, but she tried to take off, moving her vehicle forward while it was surrounded by officers. At some point, a passenger who was in the car got out and was now on the sidewalk. During the commotion, the male passenger took the child and left, police said, adding that he is the suspect in the shooting in question. The woman was eventually taken into custody and charged with interfering with police and reckless endangerment. Police said that she did not sustain any injuries. Police said they did not use pepper spray or weapons during the incident. The use of force in the incident is being reviewed by the department. How many more times will this happen before the police simply said stolen car? We don't care. Why should we care? Because our faces are going to be all over social media, and people are going to be screaming abuse at us and accusing us of everything under the sun. It's just not worth it. Bizarre story from St. Petersburg, Florida, from the Gateway Pundit. Last night, we reported on the Black Lives Matter mob in St. Pete. Harassing diners, the BLM animals may have targeted diners suspected of being Jewish in apparent hate crimes. They pulled up chairs and started threatening an elderly white couple at a restaurant. In the two images below, the diners are targeted by the BLM mob when an individual sits down at the elderly couple's table and will not leave. The individual is carrying a skateboard, which we now know is standard Antifa weaponry. The mob member is asked to leave, and he refuses. Yes, these same individuals have been assaulting drivers for the past 5 months. This person of interest lowers his mask and spits on the woman diner. This is while the second person of interest is in the background dressed in a ceremonial Jewish prayer shawl and blowing a shofar, a ceremonial Jewish horn. A lot of crazy people. I suppose it's tension that reveals high tension that reveals craziness, but the events of 2020 have demonstrated how much latent craziness already existed. Let's have a look at the chat here. Jim Bowden says, yes, I'm still his favorite mortician. William Hicks says, Liz Warren ought to know the Democrats have done more than their share to construct the justice system. DeBarea says, please arrest me. This is not how life should be. It's just one of my sexual fantasies. Leponius Maximus Meridius says, cool it with the anti-Semitism, KMG. I just... Look, when you see people minding their own business, trying to eat their food, and a bunch of maniacs come up with bullhorns screaming obscenities at them or stealing their beer, this does not look good. It does not look good for Joe and Kamala. Sharp Dull says, KMG, how do you feel about changing demographics and how that increases homelessness through the increased price of housing? I don't know. Well, it certainly forces people out of where they come from. No question about that. It forces them into substandard housing at high prices. From what I've seen of the homeless, and I've seen an awful lot of them in Victoria, BC, and talked to an awful lot of them, you've heard the same stories as me. And they have problems with drugs, alcohol, or just mental illness. A number of them told me seriously that they were homeless by choice. PK Teller says, never forget LeBron did a fake hate crime on his house that was so see-through that there's been no more reporting on it, a rite of passage. PK Teller says the man arrested was charged with wanton endangerment instead of attempted murder. I can't find who made the charges. It's clearly undercharged. My Trail of Disgrace says Vinnie Riley of the DeRudy column once tried to produce a Happy Mondays EP, probably a wacky Tony Wilson idea, but gave up in frustration after several hours. It only took several hours. I don't know. I've seen pictures of Vinnie Riley. I've seen him on stage. I know what he looks like. And I wouldn't want to be in the same room as those knuckleheads from the Happy Mondays. Okay. Let's get back to it here. Oh, yes. Mail-in ballots. Nothing illegitimate about that. This is from Breitbart. The U.S. Attorney's Office of the Middle District of Pennsylvania has issued an updated statement Thursday regarding the discovery of discarded military mail-in ballots in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, that were cast for President Donald Trump. Of the 9 ballots that were discarded and then recovered, 7 were cast for Trump. 2 of the discarded ballots had been resealed inside their appropriate envelopes by Luzerne election staff prior to recovery by the FBI, and the contents of those 2 ballots are unknown. Yeah. So the story we're hearing is, of course, the USPS, which is now a sinister, possibly a Nazi organization, is going to move heaven and earth to destroy all the Biden votes. And then we find out that military votes discarded. Yeah. It's no surprise, is it? Where's the chain of authenticity here? There isn't one. Another story from Breitbart. U.S. Attorney John Durham investigating Clinton Foundation. Emerald Robinson is quite good on this kind of thing. She tweeted yesterday, there's just a long string of stories where, the hammer is finally going to come down on the Clinton-Obama crime syndicate. And it never happens, does it? It's just like QAnon. Remember when the previous Attorney General, Sessions? Man, he's been so quiet because he is just going to tear the lid off all of the sexual crimes, and that never happened. But this report is from the New York Times. As Breitbart contributor Peter Schweitzer argued in his 2015 book, Clinton Cash, The Untold Story of How and Why Foreign Governments and Business Helped Make Bill and Hillary Rich, the Clinton Foundation appeared to be a vehicle for former President Bill Clinton and then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to sell influence and access. It is widely suspected that Hillary Clinton used an illicit private email server, and destroyed her emails to hide communications that might document the foundation's activities. Remember the story about Hillary personally deleting 32,000 emails that were, irrelevant because they were personal? If you've ever spent time deleting emails because you've got too many, in your various email boxes, I have done this several times, and it is a tiresome and time-consuming activity. I remember once deleting something like 6,000 emails took me the better part of a day. And it's kind of tricky because, I am going to delete all emails that have Chelsea in them, referring to her daughter. I just choose this as an example. Well, I know there's a district of London called Chelsea. There are other people called Chelsea. You can't assume, and I've done this. I've done Boolean searches for things I think, I don't want to keep this. I have no need for it. But then I have to scan through them one by one because there will be several emails that I do want to keep. But, of course, the media was not going to take issue with Hillary Clinton's preposterous story. Obviously, she didn't delete 32,000 emails. She got somebody or a team to do it for her. These people pretend they don't know how to how computers work. There's an interesting article on UNS from Mike Whitney, who is, I don't think by any means a right-wing person or traditionally right-wing. It's called A Betrayal, Infuriating Betrayal. Here's a political puzzler for the day. Which of these two things poses a greater threat to our country? An incompetent and boastful president who has no previous government experience and who is rash and impulsive in his dealings with the media, foreign leaders, and his critics, or a political party that collaborates with senior level officials in the intel agencies, the FBI, the Department of Justice, the media, and former members of the White House to spy on the new administration with the intention of gathering damaging information that can be used to overthrow the elected government. The answer is 2. The greater threat to the country is a political power that engages in subversive activity aimed at toppling the government and seizing power. In fact, that's the greatest danger that any country can face, an enemy from within. Foreign adversaries can be countered by diplomatic engagement and shoring up the nation's military defenses, but traitors who conduct their activities below the radar using a secret network of contacts and connections to inflict maximum damage on the government are nearly unstoppable. What the Russiagate investigation shows is that high-ranking members of the Democrat Party participated in the type of activities that are described above. They were part of an illicit coup d'etat aimed at removing Donald Trump from office and rolling back the results of the 2016 elections. It is a vast understatement to say that the operation was merely an attack on Donald Trump, when in fact it was an attack on the system itself, a full-blown assault on the right of ordinary people to choose their own leaders. That's what Russiagate is really all about. It was an attempt to torpedo democracy by invoking the flimsy and unverifiable claim that Trump was an agent of the Kremlin. None of this, of course, has been discussed in a public forum because those platforms are all privately owned media that are linked to the people who executed the junta. But for those who followed events closely and for who know what actually happened, there has never been more a serious crime in American history. What we discovered was that the permanent bureaucracy, the media, and the Democratic Party are riddled with strategically placed quislings and collaborators that are willing to sabotage their own government if they are so directed. The question that immediately comes to mind is this: who concocted this plot? Who authorized the electronic eavesdropping, the confidential informants, the widespread spying, the improperly obtained warrants, the fake news, and the endless leaks to the media? Who? What we witnessed was not just an attempted coup, it was a window into the inner workings of a secret government operating independently from within the state. And the sedition was not confined to a few posts at the senior levels of the FBI, CIA, NSA, or DOJ. No, the corruption has saturated the entire structure, seeping down to the lower levels where career bureaucrats eagerly perform tasks that are designed to damage or incriminate elected officials. How did it ever get this bad? And who's calling the shots? We still don't know. Let me pose a theory. The operation might have been concocted by former CIA Director John Brennan, but Brennan surely is not the prime instigator, nor is Clapper, Comey, or even Obama. The real person or persons who initiated the coup will likely never be known. These are the big money guys who operate in the shadows and who have a stranglehold on the intelligence agencies. These are the gilded mandarins who have their tentacles wrapped firmly around the entire state power apparatus and who dictate policy from their leather-bound chairs at their high-end men's club. These are the people who decided that Donald Trump had to go, whatever the cost. Keep in mind, the Democrats have known that the Mueller probe was a fraud from as early as 2017, when the president of CrowdStrike, Sean Henry, who provided cybersecurity for the DNC, admitted to Congress that there was no forensic evidence that the DNC emails had been hacked by Russia or anyone else. Think about that for a minute. The entire Mueller investigation was based on the assumption that Russia hacked into the DNC servers and stole the emails. We now know that never happened. The cybersecurity team that conducted the investigation of the DNC computers admitted in sworn testimony before Congress that there was no evidence of exfiltration or pilfering of any kind. Repeat, there was no proof of hacking, no proof of Russian involvement, and no proof of foul play. The entire foundation upon which the Russia investigation was built turned out to be false. More important, Democrat members of the Intelligence Committee knew it was false from the get-go, but opted to let the charade continue anyway. Why? Because the truth didn't matter. What mattered was getting rid of Trump by any means necessary. So where are we at this point? I'm trying to remember how to spell Matt Iglesias' name. Because, yeah, there we go. There we go. It's significant. This guy is, he's tapped into the power, you know? And what's he talking about? Which country did he mention today? Why? Belarus. Yes, the question is, who's laying the groundwork for mass civil disobedience if this election ends up going in a Belarus direction? This is the color revolution of which we have heard so much. That the claim is going to be made that this is an illicit election. And I mentioned that deep state woman yesterday. Oh, no, there can't be a color revolution unless the election results are disputed. Oh, And here's Matt Iglesias saying, what, 1 or 2 days later, Belarus. And this is a dog whistle to all of the aspiring Matt Iglesiases, to everyone in the deep state or the deep state wannabes, that this is the plan. That Belarus, Belarus, Belarus. Now, the fact that, I don't know, 1 in 20 Americans or 1 in 50 Americans have ever heard of Belarus. I don't think that even very many people on the left had ever heard of Belarus before, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago. It doesn't matter. Suddenly, we were also concerned about Belarus. Where is that anyway? Well, its biggest city is Minsk. Minsk? I thought that was a joke. Rochelle, a young girl's erotic journey from Minsk, from Milan to Minsk. I like that joke so much because they've got it the wrong way around. Because traditionally, the journey to fame and riches or whatever goes from Minsk to Milan, or from Minsk to London, or from Minsk to New York City, or whatever. It does not go from Milan to Minsk. Let's talk about a darker story here. Well, darker than the overthrow of the United States government by a bunch of creeps, traitors. I've talked about Cuties before. Everyone has talked about Cuties, which is the Netflix film, or it's shown on Netflix. It's originally from France, made by a Senegalese refugee, a woman. It's about 11-year-olds revolting against tyrannical parental authority and mores by acting like strippers, quite graphically. This is from menofthewest.net, Boiling the Cultural Frog. Our good friend Moira Grayland, an abuse survivor and author of the hard-to-read but very important The Last Closet, agreed to share her thoughts on the evil show Cuties, which is available on Netflix. If this doesn't make you want to cancel your service to that satanic filth, nothing will. She writes, I am the daughter of famous author Marion Zimmer Bradley. She molested me and my brothers, and she was complicit in my father, Walter Breen, molesting countless other children, both male and female. At our home, if one could call it that, were many others who agreed with them. In fact, if Cuties had been made during my father's lifetime, he might have well used it to groom prospective child victims, telling them, dance like her. See, she's a movie star. Maybe you can be a movie star if you dance like that. I will not give more details of my life here, but I will give an explanation of the actual real-world impact on children who go through these kinds of experiences. Cuties, or Mignons, as it was originally titled in French, is a new film available on Netflix, which has sparked tremendous backlash. When you hear it received an award at the Sundance Film Festival, remember that the co-founder of the Sundance Film Festival is serving 10 years in prison for repeatedly molesting a 10-year-old girl. On the other hand, you have nearly hysterical mothers and fathers appalled, rightfully, by what they see in Cuties. And on the other hand, you have pseudo-intellectual poseurs pretending a high-minded wait-and-see indifference. And then there's Ben Shapiro, who just came out flatly for it, saying, oh, no, it's an attempted expose of, yeah, okay. Some will have bought Netflix's explanation that the issue was the artwork used to promote the film, not the film itself. Again, the original French artwork, as I've pointed out several times, has one of the blonde girls wearing a bra outside of her clothing. But that's the non-sexualized poster, apparently. Keep in mind, these are 11-year-old girls. Cuties is about a little girl, Amy, who's 11 years old and Muslim. It is presented as a coming-of-age film where Amy's departure from normal 11-year-old activities into blatantly sexual activity is lauded by the promotional materials as exploring her burgeoning femininity and other lies. For most of us, exploring our burgeoning femininity means playing dress-up, maybe going shopping, painting our nails, playing with makeup, dreaming about boys, and maybe even thinking about fancy weddings and having children one day. Most normal girls talk with other girls, even their mothers, for hours and hours and hours about boys and dresses or horses, or even ordinary dance classes. Most normal girls grow up with the knowledge that her daddy would never let anyone hurt her, let alone allow anyone to compel her to dance semi-nude. even if she thought for an instant that she would want to. The notion of masculine protection would be part of her normal psychology, and it would be a safe harbor, not a limit to be thrown off. It has nothing to do with twerking. Most of us will never twerk, will never watch twerking, and would turn off the TV if we saw anyone doing it. We might know as we got older that men might like that, but to us it would just look stupid and weird and embarrassing. And that is part of the problem with cuties. These girls will have lives after the film, but there will never be a way to erase their images from the film. This is not a theoretical notion. It is not a problem with the theatrical poster. Amy and her friends are twerking, but she also takes a picture of her actual private parts and posts it to social media. She tries to do the same, photographing a boy as he goes to the bathroom. This is a symptom of sexual abuse, as any psychologist would know. Little girls who have been molested act out sexually, and a smart teacher would note such behavior and intervene at once with a school counselor. Any further discussion of the long, long list of sexual activities that little girl is dragged into is too upsetting for me to contemplate. I will include it at the end because some people will actually want to know why we find this movie so upsetting. For the rest of us, even blatant flirtation with an 11-year-old child is offensive and excessive, and hearing which body parts are mangled in which way makes very little difference. I hardly know where to begin. I'm a sexual abuse survivor. Survivor means merely not dead. Lots of us are dead by our own hands or by self-destructive behavior, and many of us merely feel dead while still alive. The monsters who want to normalize pedophilia want to believe that because their child victims sometimes remain friendly instead of screaming and spitting during a sexual assault, that in some way we want it, and that it is only a repressive, paternalistic society which denies children the mythical right to their sexuality, which these monsters want to involve themselves in. But most of us are too scared to fight back. There is no resemblance between exploitative sex and loving relationships. Using children for sex monetizes love, where they learn, all too young, that love from adults is too often paid for by enduring sexual attention, which at that age is generally very painful and humiliating. It also teaches us fundamental disregard and distrust of adults, who can be turned into blithering, slobbering idiots by sex. This means we are not subject to discipline, to rules or standards or anything else. We become a law unto ourselves because there's no reason to respect any human being who is willing to hurt us for their own pleasure. Our self-actualization, if you will, means we have ended our trust of others long before we can end our reliance on them, which means the heart of all adult-child interactions are poisoned. We paradoxically remain emotionally children for far too long, always hoping there will be a real parent somewhere who will not use us, but being disappointed again and again as we silently categorize every self-serving adult into the never-trusted garbage bin. A movie like Cuties makes it look like dragging children into sex somehow makes them feel self-actualized, increasing their self-confidence, even better able to throw off the ancient patriarchal structures which hold them back. Hold them back from what? Or does it perhaps mean to hold them back from taking their own power back by becoming whores and porn stars? Tell us all about how empowered whores and porn stars are, and how frequently they have happy, long lives instead of drug addiction, misery, and suicide, on top of a fundamental distrust of men, which in many cases can never be overcome at all. In either case, it means lots and lots of sex outside the context of a safe, permanent relationship where sex is meant to be part of love, not a substitute for it. When I was 10 years old, bad men were making advances. Did it make me want to explore my burgeoning femininity? When I was a lot younger than 10, I was given fewer choices about who would touch me and how. Did it make me want to explore my burgeoning femininity? Children smile and agree and do not understand today what this sort of thing will do to tomorrow. It is our job to protect children from victimization, even victimization, which is now on the big screen. Forgive me, but I know pedophiles. Those little actresses will have to go to school with classmates having seen them mostly naked, potential dates having seen them twerk, and worst of all, adults sending them presents and stalking them, begging for pictures of their feet or worse. Now, on the strictly legal front, many of the images and actions in this film are indisputably child pornography. I will specify with the caveat that a sensitive reader might want to skim or skip this next section, which I paraphrased from multiple shared viral sources. And there's a long list which I will not read. I will say this, though. One of the problems with reaction against such atrocities as cuties is public reaction. I used to be a reporter, and occasionally I would be. I'll give you an example. I was assigned a story by the National Catholic Register, which was about how gay leaders in the state of Massachusetts were demanding that state police, stopped arresting men having public, specifically in rest areas of state highways. They claimed that this was part of their culture. So I was talking to my editor about this, and he said, you have to be careful writing about these stories or editing these stories for two reasons. One of which is that when these sort of things are described, or the sort of things that go on in cuties, a lot of people will say, that's ridiculous. It's not possible. You are making this up for shock value. And a lot of people will say, cancel my subscription. I don't pay good money to bring this kind of filth into my home. So Stanley Kubrick was trending. Normally, when people are trending, is he dead? Well, Stanley Kubrick has been dead for 20 years now, or 21 years now. So no, that wasn't the issue. No, it was a piece on CBR.com by someone called John Mendelsohn. And who is John Mendelsohn? Well, he's a graduate of Ithaca College with a degree in film. He's a writer, filmmaker, and lover of anything and everything pop culture. No, that can't be true, because that would make you an idiot. We're not writing or binge watching Netflix. Is that really something to boast about? John loves to travel. Of course he does, because he's a bug man, and find all the hottest foodie spots, of course, because he is a bug man. But there is an essay called Why Stanley Kubrick Was Never Able to Tap into His Full Potential. Although, without a doubt, one of the most talented filmmakers of all time, visionary auteur, Stanley Kubrick was never able to tap into his true potential because of his toxic masculinity and obsession with the gender binary, among other things, Urge to Kill rising. His films are so colorful and artistic, yet never allow women to be the main focus. I feel like Kubrick was almost afraid of femininity unless it was there to serve a man or please the eyes. I don't think Nicole Kidman's role in Eyes Wide Shut, I don't really think she's particularly there to serve a man. Is she? Seems pretty independent to me. Despite his immense talent, Kubrick was so stubborn and close-minded and never allowed himself to receive feedback from his cast and crew that is absolutely false. It is demonstrated in many, 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 many innumerable interviews that Kubrick was open to input from anyone on the cast and crew. Anyone. He used to joke to them, go ahead and tell me, because I'm going to take the credit for it anyway. Yes. He also refused to treat them as his team. Kubrick worked closely with the same people over many films, which suggests the opposite. As if he always needed to be in control. Yes, why would the director, producer want to be in control of his film? Which in turn hurt his films more than he ever knew. To put it simply, if Kubrick was never brainwashed by stereotypes, who knows what kind of masterclass filmmaking he could have achieved. Kubrick made a point. This is in one of the books written about him by one of his collaborators. He used to insist to screenwriters, insert obvious cliches, because cliches are cliches for a reason. But Kubrick was a perfectionist who was terrified of failure, and that fear held him back from being the best artist he could truly be. Instead of properly directing his actors and giving them the chance to truly become their characters, Kubrick forced them to do takes over 100 times in order to make it perfect. No, that's not what happened. Kubrick said that the reason he asked for so many takes was because the actors didn't know their lines. And this is absolutely true. It has now become routine for American actors, especially, to improvise. Kubrick was fine with improvisation so long as it could be actually written down and put into a script. But no, just making up stuff and I'm the star here, so that's going to be in the film. No, Kubrick had no truck with that, and why should he? One of the reasons why Kubrick liked British actors, the famous anecdote about him, that he heard these stars of Spartacus, Laurence Olivier, Charles Laughton, and Peter Ustinov. They were walking back and forth next to each other, close to each other, and they were muttering. Kubrick, who was a rather paranoid fellow, thought they were plotting something against him. And he asked, what are they doing? Oh, they're memorizing their lines. Memorizing their lines. He was very impressed with this. Now, memorizing your lines doesn't mean, for instance, me reading like I'm reading this story off the screen. No, it must become internalized. And acting is not possible unless the lines you're saying are internalized. A great filmmaker is not only great because of their talent, but also the way they cooperate with others. Kubrick's treatment of his cast and crew seemed closer to the actions of a dictator than a film director. There are many. Alfred Hitchcock once said that I'm accused of saying that, of having said that actors are cattle. He said, no, what I said was actors should be treated like cattle. Kubrick's poor treatment of actors also affected A-listers as much as it did smaller character actors. The filmmaker famously forced Tom Cruise to walk through a door 90 different times, but no actor may have suffered more at the hands of Kubrick than the shining star Shelley Duvall. She played the lead female role of Wendy Torrance opposite Jack Nicholson. But while Nicholson and Kubrick developed what might be described as a bromance, Duvall worked for what appeared to be a different director. No, she didn't give him what he wanted. Kubrick acted like a tyrant towards Duvall in order to instill what he thought would seem like genuine fear. Yes, he makes that clear, and it is obvious in the final results in Shining. Anyone who has seen a lot of horror films will see people who were supposed to be scared to death. They do not seem to be scared to death. Shelley Duvall appears to be scared to death in this film. The director's behavior towards women almost makes him seem like a misogynist, but the truth is he may have felt insecure about his abilities and, because of his toxic masculinity, never wanted to let a woman have any power when he was around. However, women were not the only people disrespected on his sets. During the shoot of the 1957 war film Paths of Glory, Kubrick butted heads with star Kirk Douglas. Yes, Kirk Douglas was the meekest man alive, and no one ever had a bad word for Kirk Douglas. Kubrick also reportedly worked the actors from that film to death, not even allowing them to break for lunch sometimes. He also forced his obsession with control into every aspect of his film, including the editing and cinematography. Can you imagine? The fact is that Kubrick could do practically every job on a film, including lighting. He learned from the ground up. And famously, for The Killing, a Oscar-winning DP was directed, and Kubrick told him he wanted to use a certain lens for, I believe, opening shot. And this DP did not use the lens that Kubrick had asked for. And he said, no, you'll get the same coverage and it'll be better this way. And Kubrick said, you're going to use the lens I asked for. And the fact that this fellow was an Oscar winner and was married to Merle Oberon, no less, made no difference to Kubrick. One of the reasons why film directors tend to admire Kubrick is they look at his films and they think, I wish I could have done that. Not necessarily in the results, but just in the extent of the control that they got. Oh, Kubrick's perfectionism really hurt him as well, due to the fact that it took him twice as long to finish a film than many other directors. And the films of directors like Steven Spielberg or Martin Scorsese push movies out constantly, are sometimes considered just as good or even better. Really? People out there think that Steven Spielberg's films are better than Stanley Kubrick's? One interesting idea to ponder about Kubrick is the thought that possibly the reason he always needed to be in such control is that he had low self-esteem and was overcompensating. Yeah, low self-esteem. That is not a term that is normally applied to Stanley Kubrick. It's preposterous. This is a man who didn't graduate from high school. Okay, and when he was very young, I think 20 years old, or not even 20 years old, he became a staff photographer for Look magazine, which was a best-selling pictorial magazine in the United States and a rival to Life magazine. This is a man who decided to make feature films without any kind of support. His first film was made by borrowing money from his family. That is typically not how it is done. This is a man who learned about making films from watching films, not by going to film school. Oh, let's see. He also may have suffered from fragile masculinity, hence why he treated actresses differently than their male counterparts and why women were never at the forefront of his work. Fragile masculinity. No, I don't see that at all either. There's an enormous amount of toxic masculinity displayed in Stanley Kubrick's films, and many people on Twitter have had a lot of fun today showing, stills or screen caps from particularly ones that employ the famous Kubrick stare. Provocative filmmakers like Nicholas Winding Refn and David Lynch are examples of filmmakers who have a clear vision, but listen to their cast and crew and treat them like a man. Scatman Crothers complained about the number of takes that he had to do on The Shining. Kubrick's daughter said that Scatman Crothers was a nice guy, very funny guy, who seemed to know the lyrics to every popular song. Unfortunately, he didn't know his lines. If Kubrick treated people with more respect and was introspective about why he wanted to make what he did, he could have become the true masterclass filmmaker he always wanted to be perceived as. But instead, his behavior has caused him to be remembered as a visionary yet tyrannical filmmaker who wouldn't listen to anyone but himself. Kubrick, he lived with his family, his dogs and cats, in mansions outside London, and the whole world came to him. And Kubrick had no shortage of people who wanted to be his friend, people that he had worked with or people that admired him. He was close friends with the novelist John le Carré, and John Boorman found out that John le Carré regularly made visits to the Kubrick manse, and he was envious. And he had known Kubrick for a long time. They both worked for Warner Brothers, and so they talked on the phone many, many times. And so John Boorman calls up Stanley Kubrick and suggests that he make a visit. And Kubrick said, I don't know, John. I think we have a perfectly good telephonic relationship. Now, this fellow, John Mendelsohn, is obviously a bugman idiot, but you see here what could be the beginning of a crusade to cancel Kubrick. Because, we can't have anything that's good anymore. And the idea of a film director being tyrannical is somehow being noteworthy. Does this guy know anything about film at all? Speaking of film, I'm going to speak in some detail now about one, since this is Theater Thursday. And the movie is from 1959, and it is Japanese. It is from the director Yasujiro Ozu, and it is called Good Morning. And I should begin by giving some good news about the presentation of this film. Because, as is the case with many films, particularly many Japanese films of that time, it was not well preserved. And when DVDs began to be produced, it did not look good. Even the Criterion Collection DVD it was not easy on the eyes at all. If you go to DVD Beaver, you can have the comparison of various versions. And the original Criterion version, it looks rubbish. A few years ago, the British Film Institute, BFI, brought out a Blu-ray version, which was a vast improvement. That's the version that I have. BFI has put out many films by Ozu. But now we have a Blu-ray from the Criterion Collection, which is based on a 4K restoration. And it has, as typical with Criterion, a great many features, including Ozu's 1932 comedy, I Was Born But, of which Good Morning is to some extent a remake, and 3 essays and lengthy essays and interviews on Ozu and his film. Ozu was born in 1903 and died in 1963. He made an enormous number of films, dozens and dozens of them. And I suppose you see in Ozu a more Japanese style of making films than Kurosawa. Of course, Kurosawa was deeply disturbed by the lack of respect that he had got amongst Japanese film critics, because he was considered to be too Western, and he attempted suicide as a result. No one is going to accuse Ozu of not being Japanese enough. And he has this series of films that he made, later films that he made, which are considered masterpieces, including Late Spring Tokyo Story, Floating Weeds, and Tokyo Story. Now, what you find in I should mention that this film it's filmed in a suburb of Japan. And you have a kind of series of row houses, and you have close thereby, there is one of the most hideous, brutalist structures that I have ever seen. The surroundings are rather appalling, but Ozu and his cinematographer, who is Yohiro Atsuto, they have chosen a rather beautiful color scheme in order to confront the hideousness of the external surroundings. This is a movie which I suppose surprises a lot of people about Ozu, because it is it's a satire, but it is really quite a gentle satire. And it's about family, of course, because Ozu's films tend to be about family. But it is about gossip, and it is about silence, and it is about sake, and it is about washing machines, TV sets, and farting. Yes, a lot of farting in this film. Central to the film are 2 boys, 2 brothers, and I suppose this is the sort of thing that boys are interested in. But the word transcendental is often applied to Ozu, and that it was Paul Schrader, the critic, turned scenarist, turned director, who wrote a book about Ozu, and as well as 2 other directors. This is what Paul Schrader had to say about Ozu in his book Transcendental Style in Film. The other 2 were Robert Bresson and Carl Dreyer. Ozu's career was one of refinement. He constantly limited his technique, subject matter, and editorial comment. Ozu's later cycle of family office films, 13 films from 1949 to 1962, features the estrangement of parents and children. The incidents of estrangements are in themselves remarkably petty: marriage, relocation, and seen as reactionary by many Japanese youths. In a sense, Ozu bucked fashion in his pursuit of a filmic transcendental style, but the resistance he met was relatively minor compared to the resistance encountered by Bresson, who in France says to go back to the scholastics for an aesthetic precedent, and on the way forfeited any hope of mass popularity or commercial success. Early in his career, Ozu made 54 films over 35 years, from 1927 to 1962. He filmed the romantic and social themes insisted upon by Japanese producers. But later in his life, particularly after the Second World War, Ozu limited himself to the shomin genre, and within the shomin geki to certain forms of conflict and resolution. The shomin genre concerns proletarian and middle-class life and the sometimes humorous, sometimes bitter relations within the family. The shomin geki, originally a genre of melodrama and light comedy, originated in the late 1920s and early 30s, only after the Japanese middle class had become sufficiently entrenched to laugh at itself. Several critics have pointed out the evolution of Ozu's approach by comparing the 1932 I Was Born But with the 1959 remake, Good Morning. That they were social in particular. His intentions in Good Morning were satirical and universal. Compared to the remake I Was Born But was active rather than contemplative. Ozu's early films were squarely within the original shomin geki concept: light, understated comedies with a tinge of social consciousness. Time, affluence, the war, governmental pressures, and westernization sobered the shomin geki in general, and Ozu in particular. When Ozu changed, when his light comedy slowly turned to resigned sadness, he took the shomin geki with him, exerting much the same influence over the shomin genre as John Ford did over the American Western. Ozu's later films were not descriptive of the shomin geki, but prescriptive of it. The film critic and a great lover of Japan, Donald Ritchie, wrote, "In every Ozu film, the whole world exists in one family. The ends of the earth are no more distant than outside the house." In his films, the middle class is represented by office workers, and in some films, such as Early Spring, the office family replaces the household family unit. Ozu focuses on the tensions between the home and the office, the parent and the child, which are extensions of the tensions between the old and new Japan, between tradition and westernization, and ultimately between man and nature. Ozu's later cycle of family office films, 1949 to 1962, yes, the estrangement of parents and children, and that's what we see in Good Morning. We begin with a seemingly trivial incident, which becomes major in the film. That there is a women's club for this community, and the women contribute dues, but the dues have not been handed in. And there is a dispute between Mrs. Hayashi, who's the treasurer, and the chairwoman, Mrs. Haraguchi. And there is, we know one thing, that the dues have not been handed in, but who is responsible for this? And Mrs. Haraguchi jumps to the conclusion that the money has been stolen by Mrs. Hayashi. And how does she know that? Well, because she has a new washing machine. The consumer goods are very central to the plot and the feel of Good Morning. And you see that Ozu he's put a lot of brand names in his film, Asahi beer and other such things. And these are like totems of success to have brand names in one's home. Now, it turns out that the missing dues are, it's a misunderstanding, because the money had been given to Haraguchi's mother. But she is not entirely compos mentis, and spends a lot of time kneeling in front of her idols and telling her beads, and she's not really in the world anymore. And she has the money, she just forgot to hand it over, whereupon her daughter starts railing at her at being senile and useless. And the old woman is rather philosophical about it. She says that, oh, she thinks that she raised herself. Did she? Now, I have to say that I was quite taken with Chishu Ryu as Kuniko Miyaki, Mrs. Hayashi. She is you see the very sensitive looking woman in her face, as opposed to Mrs. Haraguchi, who is she seems like quite a nasty. Well, she's quite a nasty woman in this film, quite fond of gossip and slandering others. She has a very low mind. Now, Hayashi's family, there are the two boys, and they really are delightfully played, particularly the younger one, as he attempts to imitate his brother. He seems to, his brother is clearly the leader, to him, but he is not really capable much of asserting, what he thinks. He's just imitating his brother, and he makes these curious gestures like this to show his anger, or what he imagines his anger to be. And the two boys want a television set, and there's no television set in their family. And he thinks that this is unfair, that his parents are cheap. And they make a habit of watching television at another apartment, and there are many scenes of them sneaking away. You see the doors open and close. I'll just say one thing about expressions of anger in a Japanese film, where you have the traditional Japanese rooms with these sliding doors, the traditional Western gesture of slamming the door to make a point. You can't do that in a Japanese film. And we also see the daughter, who is we see a sort of burgeoning romance with a young man, which takes its time, because a point has to be made. The boys, well, I've just mentioned the flatulence aspect. That the boys, we see them first going to school. We see the three older boys dressed in the traditional military style uniforms with their cap, and the littlest boy, who looks very much like Jerry Mathers of Beaver Cleaver. He looks like a Japanese version of him. And they play a game much like the pull my finger game in the West. It's, I don't know, a Japanese version of that. You're poked on the forehead and you produce gas. And there's one hapless boy there who can't do it. And he is shamed by this. And the consequences are even worse for him because he is constantly fouling his drawers, quite literally, as a result of straining to do this. And his mother cannot understand why he is constantly asking for clean underwear. This poor boy, poor boy. But Hayashi's sons, when it is made clear to them they are not going to get a television set, they decide on a strike of silence. They're going to stop speaking entirely. It was only after I watched this film that I realized that I had done something very similar at the age of about 11, which is about the age of the older brother of this film. And I'm not going to mention why I did it because it is too stupid and shameful. And I got my younger sister involved in this as well. It wasn't silence against the whole world, just silence against my mother and father. But the neighbors, they see these boys and they refuse to give traditional greetings such as good morning. And then they believe that their mother has taken against them because of the affair of the missing dues. And so, oh yes, I was loaned a ticket. I was loaned some Asahi beer, and we must give it back immediately. And poor Mrs. Hiyashi realized this that much of the neighborhood has turned against her. The apartment that the boys go to watch wrestling is, I guess this is a little satirical jab at, westernized Japanese that, of course, we have on Saturday Night Live and elsewhere, jabs at, Americans who attempt to live as they see it, a Japanese lifestyle. But this is a rather louche young couple. The woman is quite good looking, and they wear dressing gowns throughout the day. And you see all of these various accoutrements of Western life, including a film poster for a Tony Curtis movie. You see a guitar case and all of these other things, that they consider themselves to be different, superior to the rest of the community. The boys go to school and they will not speak. They've developed a language. The OK sign appears frequently in the film. That if one of them wants to speak, they make the sign and they get a yes or a no. But it's frequently no. They can't come up with a way with dumb show to decide that they need to come up with their weekly or monthly lunch money. And the teacher comes to visit them. Later, the teacher, saves them in a way after they flee from home. But of course, watching this film, one is struck by how incredibly high trust a society Japan was, at least in 1959. People constantly coming in and out of others' houses. The doors aren't locked. They just slide open the door and walk through and call out. Occasionally, you'll find some shy person knocking, but the housewives are just in and out, in and out. And there's a very amusing scene where we see, we see what the lower class at the bar drinking sake and sometimes having too much of it and complaining about the miseries of life, the miseries of feeling redundant, that they are being pushed out of their jobs, that they're too old, and, even a retired man has to eat and drink. And as I say, there's one particular scene where this fellow gets very, very drunk indeed. And it's after a discussion about television, whether television will make Japan a nation of idiots. And so he stumbles home and he stumbles into the wrong apartment. And he is very drunk and very boisterous. And nobody seems to be particularly put out about this, whereas the reaction in Western cultures would be typically to scream, yell, fear for your life, call the police, etc., especially since, boys have been exposed to this. But the reason that the boys give for refusing to speak is that they say that adults say all of these things which are pointless. Good morning, good evening, how are you, how was your day, oh, it's a lovely day today, etc., 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 all of these cliches. And this is the sort of thing that a child thinks, that social conventions make little sense to a child. The social conventions are drilled into children because of the egotism of children. I recall at a somewhat older age, I suppose I must have been about 14 years old, hearing two adults, family members, having a supposedly adult conversation on an issue to do with culture, popular culture, I suppose. And it just sort of hit me overwhelmingly. This is what adults talk about? It's all nonsense. It's just conversation for the sake of it. But conversation for the sake of it is one of the things that prevents people from lunging at each other. That it's they're signals of respect and of ability to get along with other people. But of course, we see this exemplified in Good Morning in many different ways other than conversation, of not wanting to give offense. Now, one of the disillusioned workers in the film, he has a lucky break. He gets offered a job, and but the job is door-to-door sales, and it's for an electronics firm. Oh, and he has all of these brochures. We sell this, and we sell that, and we sell the other. And so he puts it to the Hayashis that they should buy something from him. And they decide that it would be just for them to buy something from him in order to celebrate his good fortune. And so it is that the boys who have run away when approached by a policeman because they had stolen food and receptacles from their parents' apartment, so they're brought back, and they find, to their delight, a television set in a box. And I guess, it's difficult to imagine how a 14-inch black and white television with a CRT tube could have been such an important thing to young people at the time, but that's how it was. Now, Good Morning and other such trivialities, it's pointed out to the translator who's out of a job, who has eyes for a member of the Hayashi family, that there comes a time when, you have to move on to trivialities to say something important. And that's how the movie ends, with him, making a date to go to the Ginza in Tokyo. They find themselves side by side, waiting for a train. And the final shot of this film is exceedingly memorable and comic. But I was tempted watching this film to take a very hard line against the boys, because their impudence and disobedience and lack of respect for their parents is it's quite off-putting. But part of the charm of this film is that this terrible dilemma over whether or not to buy a television set it's solved in such an ingenious and charming manner. So those are my thoughts on Good Morning by Ozu. Ozu is one of the greats of cinema. This is the first of his movies I've discussed in this space, but doubtless there will be many more. So let's have a final look at the chat. What should we rename Full Metal Jacket, says YT. Full Metal Straight Jacket, says Brandon Smith. Full Metal WAP, says Glib Medley. Just going back to Stanley Kubrick again, you hear people say that there's no emotion in his films, and I'm thinking, I just don't understand people who would say that. That if you look at, examine, say, the stricken look of Barry Lyndon in the penultimate scene when he's leaving his exile to the continent, or the stricken look on the face of his wife when she has to sign the 500 guineas to her demon lover. And the camera hangs on her agony for so long. You can look at the suffering of Alex DeLarge in A Clockwork Orange. The suffering of his torture. And just give an example of a famous scene when he has been rejected by his parents and told off by the border. And of course, the border is completely right, what he says. But there he is with a sad little parcel walking along the Thames, and you see him look out it, and the sad bit from the William Tell Overture is playing, and you know that he's thinking about killing himself. And then we have this incredible scene in the same underpass where the movie began, where the old people get their revenge on him. And then, the police are here to save me. And he looks up, and you just see this, again, this stricken look on his face, this look of terror, when he sees that his droogs are now in the police. De Berea says, Japanese men, most of them are the only fascists alive on earth. To whoever loves acute toxic masculinity, I recommend visiting Japan. Oh dear. The men in Ozu's Good Morning are not particularly strong compared to the women, or at least they are not as forceful as the women. A British American says, Japan is a distant country of which we know little. Yes, that is Neville Chamberlain is mocked today for saying 1938 that Czechoslovakia is a distant country of which we know little. Well, he was only speaking the truth, and politicians are not supposed to say that. Sorry, KMG, I'm not a foreign film guy, but I'd listen to you read the phone book. Well, that's very kind of you. Mary Crow says, thanks for this review. Ozu is one of my favorites. Late Spring is sublime. My Trail of Disgrace says, Good Morning may not be Ozu's best film, but it's probably my favorite of his, in the sense of one I can watch again. And again, of course, one of Ozu's films was essentially a Japanese remake of Make Way for Tomorrow, which may be the saddest movie ever made. Orson Welles famously said that it would make a stone weep. Okay, so what is coming up next on Theater Thursday? Oh, a comedy, a rather broader comedy. It's a comedy about romance. It's called Modern Romance, but it's also a satire on the film industry, or the low-budget film industry. It's written, directed by Albert Brooks. And then a couple of movies from this year, both from Netflix. Bill and Ted Face the Music on October 8th, and I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Charlie Kaufman on October 15th. And then October the 22nd, Nosferatu, A Symphony of Terror by Werner Herzog, which is, of course, his remake of F.W. Murnau's 1924 original starring Max Schreck. And on the book club tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about exceedingly influential book, The Culture of Narcissism by Christopher Lasch, a man who died far too young. So that's it for today. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to donate to this live stream, which would be very apposite, given the stress and flux that I'm enduring at the moment, having people come through, doing tours, seeing whether they want to buy this place. And of course, when they do, then I'm out. My PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can send me money directly through interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I will leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to form some sort of genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.